Giants. Usborne, in association with Ashton Scholastic. Giants. Christopher Rawson. Illustrated by Stephen Cartwright. Contents: all kinds of giants. The giant of St Michael's Mount. Hemo, the big bad giant. Patrick O'Brien, the Irish giant. John and the troll wife. Niels and the giants. Spot the giant differences. King Frederick's army. The Empress of Austria's party. More famous giants. Consultant Eric Marple. Reading expert Betty Root. Centre for the Teaching of Reading, University of Reading. All sorts of giants. Once upon a time, there were lots of giants in the world. Some were good and some were bad. These are stories people told about them. This really big giant tried to hit people with his club, but he was so slow he always missed them. These two giants liked fighting. They shouted and roared, but neither of them won the battles. This giant was so big, he was always hungry. When he found food, he just took what he wanted and never paid. A mountain giant lived all alone in a cave. He liked hiding behind rocks and playing tricks on travellers. This stupid giant sat down, even on someone's house, when he was tired. A very sad giant cried all day, and his tears made a great lake. This was a kind giant, who was friendly and helpful to grannies. The giant of St Michael's Mount. The giant who lived on St Michael's Mount and the giant who lived on Tracroban Hill were shoemakers, but they only had one hammer. One day the giant on St Michael's Mount shouted to his friend, "Hello, giant Tracroban! Please will you lend me the hammer?" Giant Tracroban picked it up and threw it over the water. "Look out!" he shouted. "Here it comes!" The wife of the giant on St Michael's Mount was in her cave. She ran out when she heard the shouting, but she did not see the hammer. It landed on the top of her head, and she fell down and died. The two giants were so sad they could not think what to do. They sat down and cried so much they made a great storm of giant tears. Some people say they lifted up the church and buried the giant's wife under it. Others say they just rolled her down the hill into the sea. Hemo, the big bad giant. There was once a bad giant called Hemo. He ruled over all the lands in Austria beside the river Inn. When Hemo was angry, he ran through the villages, knocking down the houses and frightening all the people. Then one day, God spoke to Hemo. He told him to stop being a nuisance. So Hemo became a monk and started to build a monastery. The devil was cross that God had turned Hemo into a good giant. He sent a dragon to frighten him and stop him building his monastery. But Hemo knew God would protect him, so he went out all alone to fight the dragon. He cut out its tongue, which was longer than a bed. Then Hemo finished building his monastery. He lived there for many years, helping the poor people and looking after their children. When Hemo died, they put his body in a coffin long enough for 10 men. Then they built a statue of him, holding up the dragon's tongue. Patrick O'Brien, the Irish giant. This is a story of Patrick O'Brien. He built houses in Ireland about 150 years ago. Patrick was nearly 3 metres tall. People used to pay lots of money just to come and look at him. But Patrick did not get any money. He was put in prison because he could not pay for his food. When he was let out, he went to London. Everyone wanted to meet the friendly Irish giant, and soon he became rich and famous. He used to walk around the streets of London in the middle of the night. People ran away when he stopped to light his pipe from a gas lamp. Patrick was so tall that a special coach had to be made for him to ride in. A big box was fixed under the floor to make enough room for his legs. One day, a highwayman tried to rob Patrick's coach, but when Patrick leaned out of the window, the robber was so frightened he galloped away. When he was at home, he sat on the table. There were no chairs big enough for Patrick to sit on. But poor Patrick was not very strong. Sometimes he needed help to climb up steep hills. When he died, his skeleton was preserved. You can see it in the Royal College of Surgeons in London. John and the Troll Wife. There was once a poor farmer who lived far away in the north of the world. The farmer's wife was dead, and he had one son called John. All through the spring and summer they worked in the fields, but in the autumn they travelled far beyond the mountains to fish in the sea. One year the farmer said to John, "You must go alone. I am too old now. But remember to hurry past the big black rock where the troll lives." When John was in the mountains, there was a storm. The thunder boomed and the lightning flashed. Suddenly, John saw a big black rock. He was so pleased to see a place to shelter, he forgot his father's warning. He drove his horses under the rock and let them eat the grass. He unpacked his basket of food and sat down outside the cave to eat his supper. He had some cheese, a loaf of bread, an apple, and one big fish. Suddenly, from inside the cave, he heard two babies crying, "We want food! We are so hungry!" John picked up the fish. He cut it in half and spread the two halves with butter. Then he threw them into the cave. "Here you are," he shouted. At once the crying stopped. John was tired and lay down. He was just going to sleep when he saw a huge troll wife going into the cave. "I smell a man," she growled. When the troll wife came out, she gave John a big smile. "Thank you for feeding my children," she said, carrying him into the cave. Inside the cave, the troll wife picked up her children. "Ye shall sleep in their bed," she said to John. Soon he was fast asleep. Next morning she gave John fried fish for breakfast, and he told her all about his father. The troll wife gave John some magic fishing hooks. Before John left, the troll wife said, "When you get to the seashore, tie up your horses on the beach. I will look after them all through the winter. You must find the old man who lives in the tumble-down hut. Use the magic hooks and only go fishing near the painted rock." When John reached the seashore, the fishermen laughed at him. "Who will look after your horses?" they asked. John said nothing about the troll wife. Then he went to look for the old man who had a boat. "You won't catch any fish with me," the old man said. "I never have any luck." Next morning, John looked at the old man's boat. It was full of holes. The old man looked very sad. "We can't go fishing today," he said. "I'll soon mend it," said John. He got some tar and pieces of wood and patched up all the holes. Soon the boat was as good as new. When they rode under the painted rock, John remembered the magic hooks that the troll wife had given him. "Let's try fishing with these," he said. First, they tied the hooks to their lines. Then they put worms on the hooks. As soon as the hooks were in the water, the fish began to bite. On the first day, they filled up their boat 3 times. Each time they took the fish back to the shore, cleaned them and hung them up to dry. When the other fishermen saw all John's fish, they were amazed. "Where did you get them all?" they asked. So John told them where to fish. The next day they all tried fishing there, but they caught nothing. Only John and the old man caught more and more fish on their magic hooks. Then, on the last day of winter, they both felt big tugs on their lines. When they pulled their lines up, the magic hooks had disappeared. Now it was time for John to take his share of the fish home to his father. When he went to fetch his horses, he found a big brown horse there too. John loaded all the fish on the big brown horse. When he reached the troll's cave, he gave half of his fish to the friendly old troll wife. She thanked John and said to him, "One day you will have a dream about me. Then you must come back to this cave. Everything here will be yours." John rode back to his father. After about a year, he had a dream about the troll wife. He told his father he was going on a secret journey. When John got to the cave, he called, "Hello, troll wife, are you there?" But no one answered. Inside the cave, he found 2 big boxes. Each one had his name written on it. Suddenly, he heard a noise outside the cave. It was the big brown horse, which had carried all the fish. John tied the boxes to the horse's back. Then he led it carefully over the mountains, back to where his father was waiting. The boxes were full of troll treasure and gold. The kind old troll wife had never forgotten how one day, long ago, John had fed her hungry babies. Niels and the Giants. A man and his wife once lived in a tiny cottage right on the top of a high and windy hill. They had 2 sons. The older one, called Rasmus, helped his father mind the sheep all day. The younger son, called Niels, never helped at all. He just liked to go out shooting. The shepherd's wife had always wanted to see the Pope. One day they set off to travel to Rome. On the first evening they came to the crossroads. As they were very tired, they stopped to rest. Father, mother and Rasmus lay down to sleep, but Niels climbed a tall tree to keep guard. After a while, Niels saw 3 giants come into a clearing in the forest. They made a fire and sat on the ground to eat huge chunks of meat. The giants were so big that their spoons were like spades and their forks were as big as hay forks. Niels decided to play a trick on them. He fired his gun at one of the giant's forks just as the giant was about to eat a piece of meat. Niels thought they could not see him. The bullets hit the fork and the fork stuck into the giant's chin. "Ow!" shouted the giant. He looked up and saw Niels sitting in the tree. Before Niels had tried to run away, the giants came crashing through the trees. "Any more tricks from you," he said, "and I'll stamp you into the ground. But you're just the boy we need to defeat our enemy, the king. You can go into the castle and help us to capture his daughter, the princess. Every time we try to climb the high castle walls, the king's dog begins to bark. Then all the king's soldiers wake up again." "Yes," boomed another giant. "We have to cast a spell on the castle to send everyone to sleep, but the spell won't work on the king's dog." When they arrived at the castle, Niels said, "But I can't climb up there." "Oh, yes, you can," said the giant. "I'm going to throw you up." Niels landed with a bump on the top of the wall. He looked down at the giants. "Hurry up," they shouted. "Shoot the dog and let us in." Niels decided not to help the giants. He did not want to shoot the dog, which was nice and friendly, so he just gave it a pat to stop it barking. Niels peeped into the first room. He saw a huge sword hanging on the wall. Beside the sword was a golden cup with the words round the top. The words on the cup said, "Whoever drinks this wine may use this sword to save the princess." Niels read the words. Then he picked up the golden cup. He drank a little of the wine. Then he tried to lift the sword. He pulled with all his might, but the sword would not move. Niels peeped into another room. He found the beautiful princess asleep in bed. The giants must never capture her, he thought, so he ran back and drank all the rest of the wine. With one mighty heave he pulled out the sword. "Now I'll go and see the giants," he said. The castle had 2 doors. One was very big and the other was very small. Niels could hear the giants shouting outside, "Let us in! Let us in!" When Niels saw the 2 doors, he had an idea. "I can't open the big door," he shouted. "You'll have to come in through the small one." Niels opened the small door. Then he hid around the corner out of sight. As each giant bent down to come in, he chopped off his head with one blow. "Hooray!" shouted Niels. "I've saved the princess." Then he began to wonder if the king would be cross with him for using the magic sword. He ran out of the castle with the magic sword. He found his family and they all went off to Rome. Back in the castle, the dog began to bark. This woke up the guards. They saw the dead giants. The king was amazed when he saw the sword was missing. He wondered who had killed the giants. "We must search every land for the brave knight who has killed the wicked giants," cried the princess. "I shall marry him." So the king's men built an inn where the travellers could stay. A sign above the door said, "Anyone who tells the story of his life may stay here free." Niels and his family walked on towards Rome. Soon they came to the Alps. The path was very steep and their feet were cold. They turned around to go home. On the way back, they came to the king's new inn. Each one of them told his story. At first Niels was shy. He did not want to say who he was. Then Niels showed them the sword. "Hurrah!" shouted all the king's men. "This must be the giant killer. Fetch the king and the princess." The sword was put back on the wall. Niels and the princess were married. From that day onwards, only friendly giants came to visit the king. Spot the giant differences. Here are pictures of Giant Glumwit, Mrs. Glumwit and their 2 children. But the 2 pictures are not quite the same. Can you spot the 20 differences? King Frederick's army. This is a true story about King Frederick of Prussia. He wanted giant guardsmen in his army to frighten away all the soldiers of his enemies. The king sent messengers all over the world for giants, but they were too big and clumsy to fight. They ran away when the enemy charged them. The Empress of Austria's party. Long ago, the Empress of Austria invited all the giants and dwarfs to a party. Everyone was worried that the giants would frighten the dwarfs. But the dwarfs tickled and pinched the giants, stole their food and pulled their hair. The giants began to cry and begged to go home again. Some famous giants. Tom Hickathrift. Tom Hickathrift was the hero giant of Cambridge. He was so big and strong that he fought with an axle and a cartwheel. Sand giants. Sand giants sometimes appeared to frighten travellers in the desert. Paul Bunyan. Paul Bunyan was the monster man of the Wild West. Atlas. Atlas was punished for fighting the Greek god Zeus, who was made to hold up the earth. Jordan. Jordan, the Swiss giant, used to play tricks on mountain climbers in the Alps. Giant trolls. Giant trolls lived in caves in the mountains of Norway. They sniffed out children with their long noses. People have been telling exciting stories about giants for thousands of years. When anything strange or frightening happened, they said the giants must have done it. Some said it was the giants who made the mountains into strange shapes and threw down big rocks. But there are no giants about now to ask, so no one knows if these stories are true.